South Africa and China have entered all-round strategic cooperative partnership in a new era, cementing 25 years of strong bonds of friendship and cooperation the two countries enjoy since establishing formal diplomatic relations. As part of the state visit, President Xi Jinping and President Cyril Ramaphosa jointly witnessed the signing of several bilateral cooperation instruments in the following areas: cooperation of the application of BeiDou Navigation Satellite System, sustaining housing and human settlements development, deepening bilateral trade cooperation, cultural heritage, among others. The two sides reaffirmed that they cherish the special and ever-growing friendship between the two countries and recommitted to working together towards building a high-quality China-South Africa community with a shared future. To discuss this development, we're joined by Sanusha Naidu, foreign policy analyst. Hello, Sanusha. Thank you so much for joining us at this time.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me.
So can you provide a brief overview of the historical context of China-South Africa relations? How have they evolved over the years?
Well, South Africa and China have actually deepened the relationship after 94. You know that in many ways, South Africa's relationship pre-94 was with Taiwan. And then following that, South Africa chose to recognize Beijing as in terms of the One China policy. And it has actually been one of a strategic partnership, both politically, economically, as well as in terms of the socio-economic and the cultural soft power dynamics. Now, South Africa does have a Chinese community that came in the 1800s that basically are a diaspora. And then, of course, you had more Chinese move into South Africa in terms of economic opportunities, entrepreneurship after the 1990s. Similarly, South Africa's companies like Naspers, which then opened up Tencent in China, and then of course other kinds of economic engagements took place. And so you do have that kind of economic relationship that exists between Beijing and Pretoria. So I think what you're seeing now is a deepening of those ties and more in terms of upgrading the relationship from the comprehensive strategic partnership to a much more all-inclusive partnership. And I think this is why this visit is very symbolic and significant in a sense, because it shows that South Africa and China share the kind of cooperation that will actually be beneficial in the context of South Africa's economic reconstruction and recovery program, but also aligning more synergetically to China's Belt and Road Initiative, which was part of the discussions between President Xi Jinping and Ramaphosa, but also in helping the government of national unity find traction in terms of the socioeconomic issues that they need to address in terms of the development agenda.
Yes, indeed, Sanusha. Now, but how are these agreements, expected to impact the economies of both China and South Africa? Are there any particular industries that stand to benefit the most?
Well, I think it's all encompassing, but I think one of the key areas that would be for the South African context is really around how does it stimulate manufacturing, industrialization, and of course bring about the economic development in terms of employment opportunities. I mean, that is something that has been reiterated throughout the discussions in the bilateral discussions and deliberations that both the Chinese and the South African presidencies had, and more importantly, the signing of cooperation agreements in the area of human settlements and housing, in terms of looking at sanitary and phytosanitary requirements, in terms of our exports, a trade dynamic as well. And just now we heard from our Minister of Trade and Industry that there's been some discussion and negotiation around 98 products. I don't know the products yet. I still have to have a look at what those products are that will be given some kind of access to the Chinese market based on how they'll be assessed and allowed, whether it's going to be about some kind of zero tariffing or duty-free, market-free access. We'll have to see. But those 98 products could actually be stimulating the economy as well. I think also in terms of South Africa being today, we just heard that Chinese brands like Haval have been the best-selling cars in the South African market. And that can actually act as also as an economic enabler in terms of our development, industrial corridors, industrial zones like in Cougar out in the Eastern Cape, where the Chinese are also looking at that in a critical way in terms of how they may look at production. And then, of course, there's also renewable energy. Our electricity minister, Minister Ramaphosa, is also in the delegation visiting China. And one of the key things is around procurement and power. I mean, it's around power transmission and procurement. And that's key in terms of renewable energy. And we know that the Chinese have been very key about how renewable energy is going to be critical as well to the kind of understanding in terms of assisting African countries with their energy grids and so forth. So, that's going to be important. And then, of course, the question around green technology and transfers.
Yeah. Sanusha, these agreements, how are they significant for South Africa? I mean, in the context of its foreign policy, you did say that, there's been a long-standing relationship between China and South Africa, and Ramaphosa is actually, in China at the moment as well. But how do they align with South Africa's broader goals on the continent and also internationally?
Well, our foreign policy is, it's anchored in the idea of what the National Development Plan is. And if you look at the Government of National Unity, and you look at some of the alignment of the National Development Plan, linking to Agenda 2030, linking to Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, those are kind of those anchors and those kinds of dynamics that kind of filter into our foreign policy. So the kind of better Africa we want, the better South Africa we want, and a better world that we want is also linking back to the fact that both sides have also agreed to reinforce and recommit to the global governance reform agenda, the question of recognizing that Africa is pivotal to the whole kind of value chain around critical minerals, but also understanding that there has to be that kind of national interest that comes into play when you look at, for example, the trade deficit that South Africa and China have, that South Africa has with China, and that one is one of the core issues that also has to be addressed. And so too is the trade deficit that African countries do have with China in terms of the broader trade dynamic within the continent. So I think understanding that integration of where Africa is and understanding how it may actually be very pivotal and have utility for the South African foreign policy is kind of that space where you kind of find that beneficial output. Of course, there's going to be a lot of important dynamics that need to come into play. It's important that that from the South African side that they have a key, clear, and coherent strategic work frame around this engagement. And similarly, in terms of the fact that South Africa and China are both members of the BRICS. And of course, they're going to be meeting again very soon at the summit in Russia in October. And more importantly, I think that what it does do is that it kind of articulates that South African foreign policy is not just grounded about just about what its own interests are, but it kind of ventilates around the global governance agenda. And of course, Minister Lamola is there as well as the Minister of DIRCO, and International Relations. And of course, that articulation of the support in terms of South-South cooperation, in terms of the agency and voice of the Global South is also important in the articulation of South African foreign policy.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sanusha, for taking time out to speak to us on this.
Thank you.